Hey, so this is going to be a movie that I had the idea for, admittedly, just a few hours ago. This is going to be a comparison between the movie Joker 2019, starring starring Joaquin Phoenix, and the 1976 movie Taxi Driver, starring Robert De Niro and Jodie Foster. Um, and I got this idea because I just watched the movie Taxi Driver actually for the very first time a few hours ago. I can't believe I haven't got around to watching it until now. I've long heard that there are parallels between this movie and Joker, um, not least of which is that Robert De Niro is in both movies. Um, but upon watching it, I was curious that there was a lot more differences between these movies than I thought there would be. And I'm going to go into those. But first, just to finish up some of the similarities and parallels. As I mentioned before, both have Robert De Niro in them, though he's in a different role in the Joker movie than he is in Taxi Driver by a long shot. Both have main characters. They go on mass killing sprees for which you're supposed to slightly empathize and identify with. Travis Bickle, if I'm remembering his last name right, kills a bunch of gangsters and pimps who are prostituting a 12-year-old girl, in this case, Jodie Foster's character. In Joker, he kills a bunch of people who have wronged him, like his mother, who was abusive to him as a child, or at least let her boyfriends be so, some people that assault him on the street, and a couple of other people for various reasons. None of which, by the way, warrant capital punishment, but he still murders them in a way that you're supposed to feel just a little bit of empathy for him. So there's similarities between the movies. Both take place in New York City, though I think Gotham is usually supposed to be Chicago, I think, in popular lore, but in this one they filmed it in New York, and it's kind of implied that they want you to think of New York. So, I mean, kind of similar there too. Um, I guess probably the last similarity I can think of about it too is that both of the characters have some degree of mental illness. You're supposed to also empathize with them a little bit for that. They both have, they're both loners, Arthur Fleck and Travis Bickle. And so, there's definitely some similarities. However, now to get into the differences, and really, I was surprised how numerous the differences were between these two movies. And it kind of got me started on an interesting line of thinking of comparing the two characters and their motives, as well as people's reactions to these two characters and their motives. Starting with Taxi Driver, since it's the one I just recently saw. What surprised me about it, I was expecting him just to kill a bunch of random people, similar to how Arthur Fleck did. And I was expecting, I guess I was expecting his character to be just a little bit more just really, really mentally unhinged. I mean, he was at least a little bit that way in this, but not nearly in the same way that Arthur Fleck's character is, who from the very start, with his laughing condition and his, well, he's the Joker. The Joker is supposed to be crazy. It's clear that he's extremely unhinged. And this character is, he grabs you as being a relatively normal guy who's not very bright and a little bit unhinged, but mostly just has his weird, manifesto against the world or whatever. And in many ways, Arthur Fleck's character is more of I don't know, he's kind of a victim who becomes a villain, whereas Travis Bickle is really truly more of like a vigilante who sees himself as the hero, and others see him as a hero, but others see him as a villain for good reason. And to be honest, in some ways, you can almost relate that more like to Batman, since Batman is a vigilante who fights, criminals who are very much, in many ways, deserve what they get. But he is still a vigilante, attacking people who've never done anything to him. Whereas Arthur Fleck's character is very much the victim of very bad circumstances caused to him by some pretty awful people in his life, as well as just bad luck. But of course, nothing in those circumstances still, most people would argue, warrants murdering the people that commit the acts against him. I mean, for instance, his jerk-off coworkers who get him fired, well, that happens all the time. That doesn't mean you should, murder your coworkers. His mom was not great to him as a kid, but at the very least, I mean, maybe just distancing himself from her or something would be a much more applicable, much more apt retaliation than murdering her. And the list kind of goes on. But then going back to Taxi Driver, um, I honestly, you would think you'd feel a lot more empathy for a character like Travis Bickle. But to be 100% honest with you, when I watched this movie recently, I did not. I actually felt far less empathy for him than Arthur Fleck's character. Now, that might just be because I like Batman and the Joker and I like Joaquin Phoenix. It could very well just be that, you know. But I think it was a little bit more than that, too. You know, looking at the case of like a vigilante versus, okay, let me put it this way. Take the comparison of premeditated murder versus crimes of passion. Premeditated murder is almost always considered a more vile crime than crimes of passion because usually it involves some more level of sinister planning and diabolical type thinking, whereas crimes of passion can be sometimes just done in the moment by somebody who does them under circumstances that would otherwise be somewhat understandable, you know. And Arthur Fleck, definitely the Joker, are definitely more crimes of passion. I don't think he premeditates any of the murders, whereas Travis Bickle's murders are all premeditated, and a lot of them, maybe some of the ones he was going to attempt, um, were not even justifiable. Like I think at one point he was going to assassinate a political candidate who it's never explained why. Well, it's explained, but I never understood why he wanted to assassinate him. I guess he also has one scene where he murders a guy robbing a convenience store, but that was kind of in the moment too. His big murders are where he murders the gangsters at the end. But to be honest, especially factoring in all of his latter murders, like the one or attempted murder, he doesn't succeed in murdering the political candidate. I didn't feel a lot of empathy for him. And again, I kind of found that a little interesting because he's murdering the scum of the earth. Again, these pimps are prostituting a 12-year-old girl played by Jodie Foster, who ironically was actually 12 when they shot her in the movie, which is maybe, again, probably a little bit weird that they did that, but that's the thing they used to do in movies. But my point is it just kind of got me thinking more about, why it was that I did not feel a lot of empathy for his character. And if you think about it, I mean, compare him with real life vigilantes. Like, okay, take a recent example, Thomas Matthew Crooks, the Trump shooter, I mean, he was very much a vigilante. I think he was trying to raise his own profile, and he was obviously mentally ill to some degree, but he hated Trump. There's at least some evidence to suggest that, and he probably thought he was making the world a better place by offing Trump, and people on both sides of the aisle, left and right, agree that it would not have been a good thing if Trump had been killed. It would have almost certainly led to just even further polarization and tension in the country, even if you don't like Trump, So, ironically, and that's the way a lot of vigilantes are. This may not be the best example, but I was also just watching a thing about why, a case for abolishing the sex offender list, and one very good reason listed is that making it public info, the sex offender list, where they just for life will list someone on the sex offender, it's public knowledge, is that a lot of vigilantes will find the list and often try to attempt to murder the person or attack or whatever, and it ends sometimes very poorly. Like sometimes they even get the wrong victims and go to the wrong, apartment or whatever, just get the wrong unit and kill the wrong person, or they get killed in the process, or just a lot of collateral damage happens, and it makes a very good case, against maybe not making sex offender lists public knowledge, but that's another case. But then also it just shows the vigilantism very often does not have the intended effect, and almost always goes wrong. As much as we all love Batman, I kind of like, the scene in Batman where, those vigilantes are trying to help him, attack the gangsters, but Batman turns on them and arrests them too. And when they ask, what gives you the right? What's the difference between you and us, in the Dark Knight? And then Batman answers, I'm not wearing hockey masks, as he gets into his military-grade vehicle and speeds off. Well, that's a good point. Batman is obviously exceptional because he's got technology training and things that are beyond any what normal or real person would have. But, the vigilantes that are out there to help him are just a bunch of random idiots, who could cause as much damage as they could help things, So, kind of going back to then, Arthur Fleck's character, Joker. Now, he is obviously in the wrong for what he does, but to be honest, one reason I think that I and many others empathize with his character is that he represents more the every man or every woman, in this world who tries to be a good person and tries to do the best they can every day by themselves and those around them. But sometimes life deals them such a horrible shit hand that we all almost feel like we're one bad day away from just completely snapping and killing a bunch of people who don't deserve it. And I can tell you, I'm not immune from that. I mean, I'm not saying it would be justified. I'm not saying that I've ever formed any real plans of it, but there's been days I've thought about it here and there, just thought it really would be it's like, wouldn't it be okay? I mean, it's just these people, it's like everybody I know is just a complete piece of shit. Wouldn't it be justified to just, act violently against them and just pop a lot of them off? And to give you one recent example, I apologize if this is a little bit dark and a little bit weird, but after the last 2 years, 2.5 horrible years I had in Columbus, were just one bit of bad luck after the next, most of which was not my fault. And a lot of things I look back on my career thus far, I'm 34 years old, and a lot of things that went wrong for me were my fault. But the last 2.5 years, really, a lot of it wasn't. Just like as Silicon Valley Bank collapsing, I couldn't do anything about that, and then having to go to a couple of crappy jobs between, after that, like at Spectrum and a collection center, and then, I went to a terrible branch bank of PNC, even though it was a decent job being a branch banker. But, I mean, the two people above me, one of them was verbally abusive, and I really, it only lasted 2.5 months because she was sabotaging me, and let alone doing her job of helping me on most things. And then my direct boss, my manager of the bank, just did also very little to ever stop any of it, was very unsupportive. And then she terminated me in an incredibly brutal way, one day coming in on a day when she wasn't even supposed to be in the office, and gave me 15 minutes to wrap up my stuff. And she tried to kind of also get it where I couldn't get unemployment by squeezing in a couple of performance reviews within about the week and a half time period of when she told me it wasn't working out to when the day she terminated me, so she could technically say I'd been warned. So it was just, in a nutshell, just to be honest with you, it was just a way of just completely screwing me over. Though it backfired because I did get unemployment insurance. The Ohio Unemployment Office very much ruled that I was terminated without just cause. So it kind of, and of course that will hurt her and when the HR contacts her about that. So, it played out okay, but there was some times, especially, in my darkest moments in Columbus, considering that I really wasn't even at the highest point in my life when I came to Columbus, that I just really felt almost like violent action some days was a justifiable course, against the world that just seemed to be doing its best to kill me most days. And some days I still feel that a little bit, just from the stress and misery of having to move all the way here to Phoenix, Arizona and start a new job where I'm going to be, once again, it's a call center job, so it's going to be not exactly a pleasant one, but it's a much higher level call center work than what I did at Spectrum. And it's a much better job overall. It'll require a lot of FINRA exams, which is good for me to get back on that track in the world of banking. But anyways, I'm not trying to rant about myself, but where I'm just kind of going with all this is that I think Arthur Fleck's character is very relatable for a lot of us, because or for a lot of people that maybe we see commit acts that we know are wrong, but we actually still feel empathy for them regardless of the acts. I mean, because that's the thing, despite the fact that everything that Arthur Fleck's character did was unjustifiable in Joker, I still feel a lot of empathy and relate to him, and I think a lot of other people did in the audience, which is why this movie had a unique, amount of attention on it, both positive and negative. I mean, who hasn't been in the position he's in where, if you got assaulted on the subway by a bunch of random people just beating the shit out of you, that if you had a gun on you, you might in the moment just snap and shoot them, Not that that would be justified, but it's somewhat understandable. Just like, where he murders his mother, who he realizes basically screwed him over really badly in life and lied to him about it. Again, I can kind of see why he killed her. Not that that's justified, and even like, some of the other murders I thought were a little more far-fetched, like where he murders Murray Franklin on the live TV show, but it's a dumb movie. So is Taxi Driver. Both are dumb movies. But my point just is, I think, we have to kind of notice, why movies like, Joker or movies like Taxi Driver why they sometimes do touch a nerve with, and why they do sometimes find us relating to people that otherwise we would hate, that are considered bad people. Especially the movie Joker, where there is actually almost no justification at all for what he does throughout the movie. Because, I mean, there's just a lot of people in day-to-day life that we all know have done acts that were maybe not even violent, but just really bad, but then we yet find ourselves empathizing with the person who did the immoral or evil act, I mean, this isn't an evil act, but one time I knew, this one couple. I know that it might be weird choosing a random example that nobody knows about, but just, to describe a random example I knew from my life, this guy was this pretty well-respected doctor, very nice guy. His kids generally liked him a lot, and his wife, on the other hand, was this woman who had come from money, and she just had the biggest attitude in the world about the amount of money that her family came from when she married him. And even though he was a well-paid doctor, she still always just treated him with a lot of condescension. She was, I mean, just a really nasty person, hard to get along with, not exactly a great mother. And, then some decades into their marriage, he started having an affair on her, and he also divorced her in a pretty ugly way that many would say, not that all divorces are bad, but in this case, he did a lot of things that weren't very good, where he tried to, make pretty nasty legal cases to, get a lot of her assets taken away from her that really weren't justifiable, and he did a lot of things that hurt his kids as well unnecessarily. And it was definitely something that tarnished my opinion of him greatly. But to be 100% honest with you, me, like a lot of other people, still didn't hate him after the affair was over. I mean, I kind of found myself distanced from both of them, as did my parents, because they were really more my parents' friends. That's how I knew them. But I never wanted to hate him for what he did, because I had known him, growing up as a kid, and he was always a very nice guy to me, and I liked him 1,000 times better than his wife, and most of his kids did as well. And I just couldn't hate him, despite the fact that I knew what he did was wrong. In fact, if he had divorced his wife in a more congenial way that wasn't hurting his kids in the process, I wouldn't have felt almost any antipathy towards him. But it's just the way he divorced her, not so much that he divorced her. But like I said, in this particular case, even though he did a bad thing, I never ever held it against him, and at least not that much. And still, if I just lost contact with him just randomly. But even if I had, I don't think I would have cut contact with him even after what he did. And I think a lot of us know people like that, that are kind of like Arthur Fleck's character in The Joker, even if they're not violent, where they commit acts that maybe something that life has just kind of pushed them to the breaking point, and then they do something pretty awful, and you still don't want to hate them for it, But then you compare that like with Travis Bickle's character in Taxi Driver, where this guy was just a random vigilante that thought he had the answers to the world. In this case, he figured he was going to be a good hero to Jodie Foster's 12-year-old character, who's a child prostitute, by killing her pimps and the gangsters affiliated with the pimps. And those guys probably deserved it to some extent. Their characters did in the movie, but still, in many ways, it just comes off as being kind of wrong when he does it. And he grabs me as just being an idiot in the way he does it too, because he could have killed Jodie Foster in the process, the way he just barges in shooting everybody. She could have easily gotten shot. And again, I know it's a movie, so some of this is just me talking about random fiction. But my point just is, a lot of vigilantes in real life are that way too. They often don't have super clairvoyant agendas. Their actions cause a lot more damage than they think they do. Like with the example I mentioned with the sex offender list, it's often been, vigilantes, when it comes to that, often they even get the wrong people, and they kill someone who's living at the address of the where the sex offender used to live at. And there's just been a lot of, evidence that, vigilantes very often, it may be heroized by, in society and pop culture, but usually they end up being more the villains. And I think that's why I didn't feel a lot of empathy with Travis Bickle's character. I mean, nothing that he does is really just him being pushed over the edge by life, so much as it is that him just being kind of an idiot vigilante that thinks he has the solutions to the world's problems when he really doesn't, you know. So, I don't know. That was just one interesting thing I thought about it. You know, it probably a weird topic, probably maybe something that nobody else can relate to. I don't know. But as somebody that, you know, has thought about the movie Joker a lot and, you know, has also now seen the movie Taxi Driver, so I can compare it, I just think it's an interesting discussion to have about, you know, the differences between crimes of passion and premeditated crimes, or, you know, crimes against people that you know in your life as opposed to maybe crimes against people that you don't know in your life, but you feel that they're overall more immoral and evil people, so therefore they deserve what they get. You know, I don't know. It kind of is something I find interesting. So probably not something a lot of other people will, but I just want to talk about it a little bit. So as usual, thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.